I'm really quite grateful to be able to be invited here to speak to all of you today, such a distinguished audience. Based on my father's request, I've been giving this lecture called Strong Korea here in Korea, Strong Korea and Japan, and in Japan. And since we are all here gathered in Korea, that will be the lecture or the topic which I would like to talk about today. The topic of this lecture is basically Strong Korea with a question mark. And we put the question mark there on purpose because we want to ask the question, is Korea a strong country? I mean, everybody knows that Korea has become wealthy. Not only has Korea gotten wealthy, we've seen exported K-pop throughout the world. But does that mean that Korea is strong? And this is a very important question we need to ask ourselves. On March 26, 2010, the Cheonam frigate was sunk. 46 sailors were killed. November 23, 2010, Yeonggyeongdo Island was bombarded. 2 Marines and 2 civilians were killed. Basically, regarding these attacks against Korean sovereignty and the killing of Korean citizens and soldiers, China basically said North and South Korea should both exercise restraint and engage in dialogue. They refused to recognize between who the aggressor was and who the victim was. It was quite odd. I mean, there is a problem if one person or one nation attacks another and kills its citizens, and you basically treat them with moral equivalence. And for China, which is a rising power, to take such a position is quite irresponsible. Of course, America has been a long-time ally of the United States. Of course, South Korea has been a long-time ally of the United States. The United States has protected South Korea, defended it during the Korean War, and also helped develop and helped engineer the economic prosperity here. And as everyone expected, America did send, 3 aircraft carrier groups to this region to stabilize the area and to ensure that peace was maintained. But we are facing one problem today. It's that America is not the same America as 50 years ago. 50 years ago, America had won World War II and was at the height of its power. Today, actually, America is facing very serious problems. Here in this chart, you can see America's twin deficits. America's trade deficit is running at nearly $500 billion a year. And as you know, America's fiscal deficit is running at nearly $1.5 trillion a year. The trade and the fiscal deficits taken together are nearly $2 trillion. These days, America doesn't have a great deal of financial flexibility or resources. And this is the fundamental problem which we face here in this region. America is the security guarantor of peace in this region. And we've had peace in East Asia because of America. But because of America's now financial weakness, here in Asia and Korea, we cannot be sure that peace can be guaranteed. We have to seriously question who will guarantee and preserve peace in this region. And this is the fundamental problem which we are facing today. As you can see, America's debt to GDP ratio is at the highest level since World War II. As of today, America's debt to GDP ratio has exceeded 100%. And right now, given the very difficult problems in Congress trying to sort out this issue, America's debt is actually expected to grow exponentially and is currently unsustainable, as indicated by the light blue line, which you see growing at an exponential rate. Now, even if America is able to make some very serious compromises or reforms to its fiscal budget, America still will not be in a strong financial situation. Because even with severe reductions in many of the social spending and social welfare which America offers, America's debt to GDP ratio is expected to continue to stay at an elevated level. In a better case scenario, it is expected to grow continuously, but at a slower rate. That means that America's financial flexibility will be impaired for decades to come. And this is the fundamental problem. With America's seriously difficult financial situation, everybody is forced to question whether or not America has the financial capacity to guarantee and ensure peace in this region and in the world. That is the fundamental question. How will peace be maintained in East Asia and in the world? Who will do it? Who will pay for it? And if nobody pays for peace, can we expect peace to persist? In this chart, we can see various regions' share of world GDP. Europe's share of world GDP has declined steadily since 1969. It's gone from nearly 36% to about 27%. America has roughly maintained its share of world GDP at about 27%. And the real story here is basically Asia's growth of world GDP share, which has grown from 15% to nearly 27%. The important thing to recognize here is that as of today, we've actually come to the point of inflection where Asia's share of world GDP will surpass that of Europe and the US. Now, we've heard this story about the rise of Asia many times, and we're seeing the rise of Asia. And up until a few years ago, we've enjoyed the prosperity which resulted from it. But we need to ask ourselves the question, whether or not this rise of Asia has only good points, or if there are some other issues which we need to be concerned about. Because, as you know, Asia is made up of a lot of countries. One of the countries which includes Asia is, of course, Japan. But we know in the last 20 years, Japan has not grown very much. Korea is the same way. Korea's growth for the last 15 years has slowed down consistently because these societies, like Europe, they are pursuing more social welfare-oriented policies, and as a result have seen their growth rates pretty much slow down. And so we know the real story of the growth of Asia is actually the growth of the Chinese economy. Since they've adopted capitalist economic system, Chinese economy has really blossomed, and they are now extremely wealthy. And this is what concerns us. What does this mean for the world that China is now rising? Especially since it is still a communist dictatorship. Is this good for peace? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. Is the rise of China all good? Or are there issues which we need to be concerned about? Here's another problem. In this troubling environment where the free world, America and Europe, are suffering so much economic malaise, and where we see the rise of a dictatorship in China, their economic rise, we can look at public opinion in the U.S. These polls have been taken, these questions have been asked since 1964 to the current. Well, the first question asked, whether U.S. should mind its own business internationally and let other countries get along the best that they can on their own. And as you can see, for the first time since 1964, more Americans believe that America should just let other countries make do as they do, not really get involved. And if you can see the dark blue line, you can see the trend in America is for more and more people to feel like America shouldn't get involved in international problems or affairs. If you ask the question a little bit slightly differently, whether or not America should focus on America's problems or deal with other people's problems, then the supermajority of Americans believe that America should deal with America's problems. America shouldn't deal with other people's problems. Nearly 80% of Americans feel like that. There is a very strong trend towards isolationism in the U.S., of retreating from the world. And this change in American public opinion will have a very profound effect on geopolitical stability and the questions of world peace. Whether the peace of America, Pax Americana, can be maintained in the future. At this time, during the time when Yeonpyeong-do Island was bombarded, I had a chance to watch CNN. And Piers Morgan was, of course, interviewing Donald Trump. And basically, Piers Morgan, in that interview, asked Donald about what the problems of America were. And basically, Donald Trump at that time said, America's problem is this. Korea gets attacked, and America, we, send our aircraft carriers to go protect China, go protect Korea. We do that for free. This is America's problem. This is why America's in such financial difficulty. And at this time, Donald Trump was still a Republican. And, we've heard things like this from the Democratic Party for many years, but the interesting thing about American politics these days is there's a lot of Republicans saying the same thing. And this is the problem with American politics today, is that there's a consensus. There's a consensus that Americans feel that they've been overburdened by the burdens of maintaining, peace in the world and being the sole police state to monitor and police the activities of different nations, that America as a country is kind of burned out. They don't want to do it anymore. American people don't want to pay for everybody's security anymore. And this is a very big problem. This chart shows the GDP and military spending of various countries. As you can see, America is still the largest economy on earth, with $14 trillion of GDP and $741 billion of military spending. Of the $741 billion at this time, about $120 billion of it was for the different wars that was fighting, so the baseline spending of Americans' military is about $620-somewhat billion. The significant point which you should recognize here is that China is now the second largest nation on earth, with a $6 trillion GDP and an estimated $98 billion in military spending. Now, when people take a look at these figures, and it's often quoted in the media, they say, look, okay, fine, China's military has grown. And China is maybe the second largest military power on earth. But America's military spending is still 6 times bigger than China. What exactly do we have to worry about? It's going to be decades before China catches up to America. But there are 2 fundamental problems with that argument. The first problem with that argument is that, 1, America's military spending, as you know, is dispersed throughout the world. They have commitments in Europe. They're stuck in the Middle East, in Africa, Asia. They got to keep some troops at home. American military power is spread out throughout the whole world. Chinese military spending and military power is concentrated. It's 100% here in Asia. The second problem with this argument that the world has nothing to worry about because American military spending is 6 times bigger is that whereas this exchange rate-based comparison may work well when you compare nations with similar GDP per capita, like Japan versus America, it doesn't work so well when you compare a country which has a very high GDP per capita to a country with a relatively low GDP per capita. Simply because everything in China is cheaper. And that includes military equipment and soldiers. For example, just compare the cost of 1 soldier in China versus the cost of 1 soldier in America. For the same soldier, in China, it only costs a fraction of the cost. Just a fraction of the cost of the American soldier. And that's the fundamental problem. And so actually the US CIA has actually developed an index called the Purchasing Power Parity Index, which readjusts for differences in commodity prices. And so if you readjust these figures based on purchasing power parity, then they are significantly different. As you can see here, on a purchasing power parity term, China's GDP increases to nearly $9 trillion. And Chinese defense spending increases to $380 billion. That means on a purchasing power parity base, as of today, Chinese military spending is already 2/3 of American military spending. We are not only seeing the rise of China as an economic power, and we're not only seeing the shift in the world balance of power from the economic point of view, we are seeing the shift in the world military balance of power from the West, from democracies, to China, which is a dictatorship. And this is profound. The military balance is changing. Hard power is changing. Hands. Here you can see China's exponential growth in military spending. This is a picture of China's new aircraft carrier. It successfully completed its sea trials. I don't think this is what you would call a defensive weapon. I don't know what you think, but there it is. And recently, we've heard reports that instead of the 300 or 400 nuclear weapons which everybody thought China had, China is now estimated to have nearly 3,000 nuclear warheads, as reported by the Washington Post. Why would China make so many nuclear weapons? For what purpose? If China's intentions are so peaceful and defensive, why build so much offensive weapons capability? Could somebody answer that question for me? If you're so peaceful, why do you need 3,000 nuclear weapons? You know, I don't know if you heard this, but this is a report in BBC News. Kook Jin Moon, giving a speech to the Chinese Navy, basically told them to prepare for war. Last month, December 7th. That's the premier of China telling his Navy to prepare for war. Now, I've been living here in Korea almost 7 years now. Since I've been working as the head of the Unification Foundation, I've had a unique opportunity to meet many of our Korea's leaders, both in the military and the civilian side. And, you know, I was talking to one of our very senior generals, and I asked him, well, first of all, let me say this. I was very surprised to find out that whenever our Korean generals talk about defense, they're always comparing the Korean military to the North Korean military. And if you ever talk to them about Korea's defense requirement and defense needs, all their estimates are always based on what does North Korea have? This is the basis on which the Korean defense strategy is built. But I kind of found that very puzzling. Simply because, I don't know if you know that, in this region, North Korea is actually kind of the weakest military in the entire region. I know you guys heard that North Korea is a big, bad country with a big military, but it's very small compared to the other militaries in this region. My question to the generals is, why aren't you making our defense estimate based on, let's say, China's military? Aren't they a lot bigger than North Korea? Don't they have much more ability to project power to South Korea? Wasn't China the country which created this divided Korea because of their reinvasion of the Korean Peninsula at the end of the Korean War? Or for that matter, another neighbor, which is, you know, still quite powerful and investing a lot in defense modernization, is Russia. Why doesn't South Korea make its defense estimate based on Russia's military? Or, for that matter, even Japan. Japan has a long history of invading Korea. So that's the first question that came to my mind is, isn't this a little bit unrealistic that the South Korea's military estimate is based just primarily on the weakest military power? But then that aside, so I asked the general, okay, that's a problem. Their answer, of course, is that, well, those other big countries, China and whatever, that problem is America's problem. America has to solve that. That's the answer you always get when you talk to the senior policymakers in Korea. But the other question which I have for them is, okay, but given America's financial difficulties, what happens if America doesn't come? Do you have a plan for that scenario? And then they just become quiet because they really don't have a plan. So then I asked them about this question. Okay, fine, everything aside, let's just take North Korea and South Korea. If South Korea and North Korea gets into a war, excluding all the other nations in the world, I asked one of our generals, will South Korea win? And his answer is, yes, 110% South Korea will win. If it's a conventional war. He puts a condition on it. But then the problem is that North Korea has non-conventional weapons. They have nuclear weapons, They have chemical weapons, they have biological weapons, and they have short and mid-range missiles to deliver those weapons to any place in Korea with, and also Japan. And so when I asked that general, can Korea win if North Korea uses its asymmetric weapons? And then his answer changes. He goes, well, yeah, Korea could win, but then again it could lose. You can't know. And that's the state of national security here in Korea. There is none. There is no national security in this country, or in Asia. No real preparation. And all of North Korea's weapons aren't exactly backwards. They've, bought 40 Su-25 fighters from Russia.